views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting groups. If you'd like to produce a show, call us at 260-421-1250.
Let me be your lighthouse so I can show you the way. Let me be your shining light, I'll keep you from drifting away. I'm the one that makes you try when...
Hello, this is Patty Hunter of Patty's Page. Today I'll be doing an interview with Dr. Anthony Levatino, and he was a former abortionist, now pro-life activist, and we'll be with you in a moment. So, kiddo, good to see you.
Well, good to see you, Patty.
Where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in Rochester, New York.
New York. While you were growing up, who influenced you the most, you know? Mentor or...
We were a close-knit family. Probably my closest mentor was my father's eldest brother, my Uncle Charles. Was a real friend, and when I had serious questions, I would ask him, and we would talk things over sometimes. Probably him more than anybody else.
And when you went to school, how did you go to university? High school, of course, junior, middle, high school, and what other, universities or colleges or?
Once I graduated from high school, I went to Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York. They had a special, they called it a biomedical program. If you were accepted to the program and if you maintained a sufficient math science average on your studies, you were guaranteed admission to medical school. So I was able to do college and medical school in 6 years instead of 8.
Wow, that's a long time, even for 6.
Of course.
You must have worked like you... Well, anyways.
And then there's 4 years of residency after that.
So when did you become... You became a doctor. What specialty was your...
My specialty was obstetrics and gynecology.
So how long have you been a gynecologist then?
Well, since I graduated from my residency, it's been 39 years.
Wow. Wow. That's a long time, kiddo. So,
About time to hang it up.
About time to hang it up, yeah. You're married with kids?
Yes, married and have a son, Sean, who's going to turn 40 this year. Kind of scary to know you've got a 40-year-old son.
Oh my goodness. When did you become, or why did you become abortionist in the past?
Well, you know, if you asked me how I felt about the abortion issue back then, I would have not hesitated to tell you that I was pro-choice. This was a choice between a woman, her doctor, and nobody, including the baby's father, had anything to say about it. You know, a lot of people identify themselves as pro-life or pro-choice, but for most people, you know, it doesn't affect their lives directly. For many people anyway, it doesn't affect their lives directly. It doesn't even affect how they vote, which drives me wild. But when you're an obstetrician gynecologist and you say you're pro-choice, it's not just some vague political position. You have to decide whether you're going to actually do abortions. So during my residency program in obstetrics and gynecology, I learned to do first and second trimester abortions right along with deliveries, hysterectomies, and all the other things that obstetrician gynecologists do.
And what'd your wife think of that?
Well, we met when I was an intern. We found out pretty quickly that we were on opposite sides of the issue. And we made a mistake at the beginning of our relationship. You know, instead of talking it out and reaching some kind of either compromise or breaking up, we just ignored it. And it stayed that way for a long time.
That must have eaten at you guys. Her
I,
anyways.
in a way, it was easier not dealing with it, at least for a while, at least at first. But it came to be a problem later on.
How many years were you doing abortions?
Let's see, I started in 1977 when I was a first-year OBGYN resident after doing a one-year internship. And the last abortion I did was in February of 1985. So almost 8 years altogether.
Yes, I hear you. My late aunt was an abortionist in Toronto.
I'm sorry?
My late aunt Anne was an abortionist in Toronto. I never could figure out.
Okay.
Some people don't know what abortion is.
There's a lot of answers to that question depending on who you're talking to. Turn it down. A lot of answers to that question depending on who you're talking to.
Yeah.
To some people, abortion is a civil right. To some people, it's a woman's choice. And to some people, it's a way of keeping the surplus population down. There are a lot of euphemisms that we've created.
Yeah.
People, amazing, many people that support abortion won't say the word abortion. They'll just keep talking about, a woman's right to choose. You heard that during the Democratic debates just recently. They like hiding behind the euphemisms. But when you're a doctor and you're doing abortions, abortion to you is literally tearing a living human being apart, limb from.
Yeah, I hear you. My aunt did that too, and I couldn't understand why. I still haven't. But I forgave her many moons ago. I love her,
That's great.
And we love you too, man.
Thank you.
It's tough. When did you get a change of heart? What year?
Well, I graduated from my residency in 1980. We moved to the west coast of Florida for a year, but we found out pretty quickly that we didn't care to stay in that community, so we moved back to upstate New York in 1981. Now, at the time, I was not running an abortion mill. I wasn't running an abortion clinic. I was part of a routine OBGYN office in Troy, New York.
Mm-hmm.
A few blocks away from RPI, where I trained, actually,
Oh, yeah.
in college. And we did everything. We did deliveries, we did hysterectomies, but abortion was a part of our practice. So we did first trimester abortions up to about 10 weeks from last period in the office. And then if they were more than 10 weeks, we would bring them to the hospital because it was definitely safer. At the time, those of us in the abortion industry were looking for a better method of second trimester abortion. Up to that time, we were doing what are called saline abortions. Now, nobody does these anymore, but suffice it to say the patients have to go through labor. And it was very difficult on patients, very difficult on staff as well.
Yeah.
Because you'd have these really big kids being delivered dead, usually, after the saline procedure. But it would be a prolonged hospital stay. It was very expensive. And as I said, extremely stressful, especially for the patient.
Yes.
What we were looking for was a method of second trimester abortion. Second trimester, for anybody listening, is between 13 and 27 weeks of pregnancy. We used to do our abortions up to 24. We wanted a method of abortion for second trimester that was like suction B and C abortions that we were doing for the first trimester. We wanted an abortion method that, the patient would be asleep, and when she woke up, it would all be over. And at that time, that's when suction D and E was developed, and very few doctors would do that abortion. My partner and I saw an opportunity, so we taught ourselves to do suction D and E abortions, and we were getting referrals from other physicians to do some of these late-term abortions. Over the next 4 years, I did 1,200 abortions.
Wow.
10 of them, or 120 of them, were suction D and E abortions that we did in the hospital. In June 23rd, my wife and I, when, the first doubts I had about abortion were actually much earlier. We had gotten married and we were looking to have a family, and we found out pretty quickly we had an infertility problem. And despite, infertility workup is incredibly difficult on women and husbands, but mostly for the women. And after, her infertility specialist had tried the last thing he could try, he basically said, look, don't count on being able to have children of your own. And this was when I was still in training at the hospital during my residency. So we attempted to adopt a child. We went to county agencies, religious agencies, state agencies, anyone we could think of. And the best we could do was get on a 5-year waiting list to get on the real waiting list. After months and months and months of frustration with that, I came up with the idea of, well, heck, I work with obstetrician gynecologists all day long. I know 50 of them on a first name basis. Why don't we just advertise and maybe we'll get lucky and be able to get a private adoption? And that's exactly what we did. In August of 1978, I was working in the operating room when the circulating nurse tapped me on the shoulder and was holding up a piece of paper that said, call Marcia as soon as you're done. Marcia was the head of social services at the hospital I was working at, and she was one of the people I'd spoken to.
Oh, yeah.
That's all the note said, but I knew what it meant. And sure enough, she informed me that there was a 15-year-old girl in labor in the delivery room. She'd had no prenatal care. The first time she saw a doctor was the day before. But now she was in labor, her baby looked healthy, she wanted to give her baby up for adoption. Were we interested? And I said, well, of course we were interested. I tell people I remember just staring at the face of the telephone to call my wife with this news and know that I was just 7 digits away from becoming a father. And literally, by the grace of God, we were able to adopt a little girl named Heather in August of 1978. Now, as sometimes happens, once we had a daughter of my own, my wife got pregnant the very next month anyway, and we ended up where we had 2 children. Heather and my son Sean was born in July 1979. Heather and Sean were figuratively and literally close. They were only 10 months apart in age. And, but it was, we had a son and a daughter now, and this was terrific. We had a family. The first real doubts I had about abortions were just selfish ones, but they were while we were trying to adopt a child and getting nowhere. Because I knew that, part of the reason there's so few children to adopt is because of people like me doing abortions.
Yeah.
And I remember literally thinking, gosh, I'm throwing these kids in the garbage. Wouldn't even one of these moms allow us to take her child home and care for her as our own? Of course, it doesn't usually work that way. But now that we had a son and daughter of my own, that was great. We didn't have to worry about that anymore. And any doubts about abortion simply evaporated, and I went back to business as usual. As I said, between 1981 and 1985, I did 1,200 abortions, including 120, about 10%, which is the national average, actually, of the second trimester D&E abortions.
Right.
On June 23rd, 1984, everything changed when my daughter Heather who was exactly 2 months away from her 6th birthday, was struck and killed by a car in front of our home.
Oh, our condolences.
Thank you. Anybody with children may think they have some idea of what that would be like. If you haven't been through this yourself, you have no idea what it's like. I hope you never find out.
Yes.
But what do you do after a disaster? You bury your child, you take some time off, and then you try to get back in your life. And I don't know exactly how long it was after her death, but I showed up at OR number 9 at Albany Medical Center in Albany, New York, just like I had over 100 times before, to do a second trimester D&E abortion. Now, usually when we do presentations, I describe an abortion so people understand exactly what I'm talking about. But suffice it to say, you have to literally rip arms and legs off.
That's rough. That was rough.
Which I can find it. Here it is. This is a sulfur clamp. It's a great big clamp about 13 inches long. It's made of stainless steel. And you use this to literally tear the arms and legs off that child and tear out the internal organs and crush the baby's skull and take all these pieces out through the cervix. It's pretty traumatic. I mean, if the patient's asleep, she's not noticing anything. At least when I did them, we used general anesthesia
With the babies.
or very heavy sedation in any case. But few weeks after my daughter's death, I was back in the hospital to do one of these procedures, and I reached in with that clamp and I tore out an arm or a leg, and I just stared at the clamp and got sick.
Yes.
But once you start an abortion, you can't stop. You have to get 2 arms, 2 legs, and all the pieces, because if you don't, your patient's going to come back infected, bleeding, or dead. So I finished that abortion, and I know it sounds strange, but for the first time after all those years and all those abortions, I really, really looked at that pile of body parts. And I didn't see her wonderful right to choose, and I didn't see what a great doctor I was helping her with her problem, and I didn't even see the $800 cash I just made in 15 minutes. All I could see was somebody's son or daughter, and that's what changed things for me.
So, who helped you completely out of it, the abortion?
Nobody.
You did it yourself?
Other than my wife and I talking about it. Over the next few months, I kept doing a few abortions, but I'd gotten into a terrible blame game, and she could always tell when I had abortions scheduled the next day. It's never your fault. It's always somebody else's fault. It was the girl's fault for getting pregnant. It was the hospital's fault for allowing them. It was the nurse's fault for scheduling them. And of course, it was everybody's fault but my own.
Yes.
And this is what I mean about the difference in our opinion on the whole abortion issue. This is when it became important. And she almost walked out. She almost literally walked out with our son. And then that forced a discussion about abortion. And it was after that I decided to quit doing the late term or second trimester abortions. I went back to my partners the next day and said, look, I'm not doing any more of these second trimester D&E abortions. They're just too painful. For a couple of months, I kept doing just the little ones, the ones we did in the office, up to 10 weeks. But a change had come that I couldn't take back. And in February of 1985, I walked away from ever doing an abortion again.
And now you're pro-life.
Yes.
You're an activist.
Sorry.
You might say you're...
Well, some people think so.
You're a keynote speaker for life.
Sometimes.
Mm-hmm. And when did you become involved with the movie Unplanned about Abby Johnson?
Yeah, I knew about Abby Johnson. I had read her book, which was really excellent. I would suggest people read it, and I would suggest people go see the movie. So I knew about it, and I had heard something about a movie was being made of her life, and I was glad to hear it because I thought it was an important story to tell.
Yeah, it is.
But one day, out of a clear blue sky, I got a call from one of the writer-directors. It was either Chuck Konzelman or Carrie Solomon. I don't know which one it was who called me. I think it was Carrie. And they offered me a part as the abortionist in the movie. I kind of chuckled and I said, you realize, of course, I have absolutely no acting experience. And they said, no problem. I think, we know your work and we think you would be good in the role. So my wife and I went to Stillwater, Oklahoma. I think my time on screen is about 2 minutes or less. And that scene took almost 7 hours to shoot because, of course, when they do these, they shoot them over and over again, different lines or different angles, and they pick and choose once they're done with editing. But it was just a tremendous experience, and I just thought the job they did with Unplanned was just spectacular. A few people have asked, was it difficult to shoot the movie? And the answer was no. It was no trouble at all. But watching the movie was a little hard for me. It really was. Kind of brought back a lot of what I used to do.
Well, I'm glad you're where you're at now, dear. Thank God for you and your family.
Thank you.
So, how long have you been a pro-life activist for the unborn and newborn babies? How many years?
Well, I would, a little bit over 30 years at this point. A little less than a year after I stopped doing abortions, we were invited to go to a potluck dinner in our community that was hosted by a local pro-life group. Mm-hmm. And we talked to them and understood their commitment and why they felt this was so important. And that was when we decided to join their group and get involved in the pro-life movement.
I'm glad. Do you tour?
Yes. mostly my wife and I, or I myself, depending on where we're going, will speak to support pregnancy assistance centers across the country. I've been able to give a few speeches in colleges. There was one I gave at Virginia Tech that's on YouTube. It's been seen over 500,000 times at this point, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Actually, I think it's approaching 600,000 at this point.
Wow.
Views. So that's, and that helps people get a perspective. And I do different things at different presentations. In colleges, I tell them a little bit about myself so they understand where I'm coming from. But I really challenge them on understanding what the legal basis for abortion is, how we justify this legally. And it makes for an interesting discussion.
Yeah. And so where do you normally travel throughout the United States, Canada, Europe, what?
All over the place. I'll be in 8 or 9 different places this fall, and I'm going to be in Malta in late November. Malta is an island in the middle of the Pacific just south of Sicily, and it's now, after Ireland voted abortion in, Malta is the only country in Europe that prohibits abortion.
So you're going to give them more power, eh?
Well, they want to very much keep it that way. But, of course, they're under a lot of pressure from the European Union to change their law. So they've asked me to come for a week in November. I'll be bringing the movie with me.
Yes.
And we're going to talk to physicians, citizens, do interviews, and as I said, try to get the movie screened. I think it's very important that people understand exactly what abortion is about, stripped of all the euphemisms and the pleasantries that we talk about it.
I met Abby several times, and I interviewed her about last year or so about Unplanned. She was about what she had done and all. She's a very lovely lady. Do you know her personally?
Personally, I can say no. I mean, I've met her. In fact, I met her on the set of the movie. So we got a chance to talk a little bit, and that was fun. And then a couple of months after shooting the movie, I was in Texas speaking to for a week with Texas Students for Life, or Texas Right to Life, invited me to come. And I was addressing groups, pro-life groups in medical schools and law schools. And I ended up in College Station, Texas, at the very clinic where Abby Johnson used to work. And I have a picture of myself with Sean Carney, the head of 40 Days for Life, in the room where that abortion occurred that was portrayed in the movie. So that was pretty special.
I interviewed him too. I've been interviewing a lot of pro-life leaders, Dr. Vita King, Father Frank Pavone, Priest for Life, and etc. Allen County Right to Life and all. So finally, what would you like to share with my audience to encourage them that abortion is not the answer, adoption is, and keeping their babies and not be afraid?
Well, you hear a lot of, I could talk for an hour and I won't, but you hear all the time, especially with the late-term abortions, well, we need abortion to save women's lives. Everybody knows that pregnancy can be dangerous. For almost 10 years, I was teaching at the Albany Medical Center in Albany, New York, where I learned to do abortions. I later became a member of the faculty. And we used to see lots of very high-risk pregnancy situations, severe diabetes, decompensating cardiac function, cancers. We saw people that, pre-eclampsia with wildly high blood pressures that really threatened people's lives. I mean, pregnancy can threaten a woman's life. And I tell people, in my 10 years at the medical center, I saved hundreds and hundreds of women's lives, but I didn't have to kill a single baby deliberately while doing that. You cannot use abortion for these late-term situations and medical problems. Late-term abortion takes too long to do. It can take anywhere from 3 to 7 days to accomplish. When somebody comes in a true medical emergency, you don't have 3 to 7 days to deal with the problem. I always use a particular example. Was the lady came in 27 weeks pregnant, 13 weeks premature. Everybody knows a normal blood pressure is 120 over 80. Her blood pressure was 220 over 160. Her pregnancy was literally going to kill her. She was minutes away from a stroke or God knows what. So we took care of the problem. We stabilized her, we did a delivery, and she and the baby did just fine.
Yay!
But what if she had wanted an abortion instead? What if she said, you know what, I've decided I don't want this pregnancy, I'd rather have an abortion. As I said, it would take 3 to 7 days to accomplish that.
You could have killed her.
And blood pressure, when you've got a real emergency like this one, you don't have 3 to 7 days to fool around. There's no condition, there's no pregnancy condition that requires, quote, abortion, other than a very limited number of things. If the woman has an ectopic pregnancy, for instance, her pregnancy is the tube, it has to be removed. There's no option. I mean, if she has what's called a molar pregnancy, in which case it may not even be a baby, but sometimes there is, that pregnancy has to be ended. There's no option. But except for very, very, very limited kinds of cases like that, there's no medical condition that's made better by killing a baby.
Yes.
Now, lots of conditions are made better by terminating the pregnancy. I almost can't say the word, they've stolen the term.
Yes.
I terminated lots of pregnancies, but I terminated them by delivering them and not killing them. And that's what people have to understand. And the other thing I want people to understand is your votes matter. It drives me wild when you have people of faith, as one example, who are very opposed to abortion, and then somehow they go into this mind-numb robot dance when they walk into a voting booth and pull a lever for a pro-abortionist. It's insane. If every person who claimed to be pro-life was voting pro-life, I think things would be very different.
Well, we love you, man. We love you. I have forgiven a lot of people who are no longer aborting. I love you, we love you, and thank you so much for being on my show. You've been a blessing to me.
Thank you. God bless you both too.
You brought some healing for me as well. Thank you, God bless.
You're welcome. Take care.
Bye-bye, dear. This is Patty Hunter. This is the end of our show. What we were talking about was abortion and pro-life. So thank you for coming, and we'll see you next week. God bless.
Godspeed, my love, until we meet again. You're always in my heart and every dream. Don't let this time apart give in to all our fears. God will keep us close from up above. So until we meet again, Godspeed, my love. God is with us always for the rest of our lives.